All right. Happy Thursday, everybody. We're very excited to have you here today. I'm Dupre Jones, president of ISM Carolinas, Virginia. As you can see, I'm reporting from my employer company, CSL. If you've not heard of us, we're a biopharmaceutical company uh, headquartered out of Melbourne, Australia, but we've got great locations here in North Carolina, and I'm pleased to welcome my good friend Rodrigo here. Uh, he and I have had many years of involvement in ISM, and so we've been talking about getting together for this type of topic. And Rodrigo, I'm really excited for this opportunity.
Hello, everyone. Thank you, Dupre. It's a pleasure to be here with you, presenting this perspective on the not just the benefits and risks of nearshoring in Mexico, but also on the eve of the USMCA review in 2026 and the
Agreed.
impact it might have for procurement professionals.
Well, and it's going to be a pretty big topic. So we look forward to really getting into the let's first maybe if you can just share a little bit about all of the experiences you have, and then give you a chance to introduce yourself so we can all get to know you a little bit.
Thank you so much. And again, thank you to ISM Carolinas and Virginia for the opportunity to be part of this webinar series. And my name is Rodrigo Alcántara. I'm a procurement professional with more than 15 years of experience working for the public and private sectors, both in the United States and Mexico. And I've been part of ISM since 2020 on the eve, well, in the middle of the pandemic. I started being a member of ISM. I have participated in two chapters in South Florida first, and now I'm part of the board of the chapter in Arizona. And I'm so glad to be here with you today.
Well, great. Well, why don't we first let's just start with the where we have been, and just kind of the nature between the relationships between the US and Mexico. That just gives us a foundation. Oh, Dennis, thanks for being here from Rochester. Uh, so Rodrigo, if you could just maybe let's just set the stage here about, how well the partnership has been with the United States and Mexico over the years.
Well, thank you, Dupre. It's very important what you are commenting because despite having a long diplomatic relationship for over 200 years, I think that those 200 years of diplomatic relationships between the US and Mexico were celebrated last year or 2 years ago, if I will remember. The peak of the commercial relationship between both nations started in 1994, 30 years ago, with the signing of the free trade agreement between the United States, Mexico, and Canada. And it's very important, has been a very important step, not just for the Mexican economy, but also and especially for the United States, because they have been able to source with a neighbor, and especially with a neighbor with which they have over 2,000 miles of land border, and also sharing, at least having 5 states sharing the border along the frontier, and also with so many Mexicans living in the United States, and also many Americans that have moved, or as they are called in Mexico, like expats, because they've been like working very close when initiating business in Mexico, and also bringing part of the American culture into Mexico and strengthening the social relationship between both nations.
It's been really I mean, it's taken many different shapes, and it's a lot of different types of benefits, both as far as commerce, as well as culture, as well as labor.
Indeed, and now that you comment about culture, I think that also has been very important step for the Mexican society to start like not like admitting itself, but like adopting some other cultures and especially non-Hispanic Spanish speaker cultures like the United States, because mainly Mexico used to have a long tradition of commercial relationships with Spain, with other Latin American countries, but always with the United States, there was that barrier about the language and the culture, and also the idea that Mexico was many steps behind. And from 1994 is that the Mexican society, the Mexican government started working towards aligning with the United States in several parts.
Yeah. So this has been I remember when the North American Free Trade Agreement was coming up, and many in North Carolina here were worried because of our textile industry and our furniture industry and many other industries. We were really trying to we were asking ourselves, how will this impact North Carolina? And it has in many ways. So definitely look forward to more of your other thoughts as we go from that foundation.
Especially also because Mexico, before 1994, where we were living under an import substitution program, and we didn't have access to so many items, to many materials, and many of the technologies that were used in Mexico at the time were almost obsolete for the rest of the world.
Wow.
It's very important what we have how we have benefited from the USMCA,
Hmm.
and also all the things that have been left behind and not being taken advantage as as we could expect in other areas. And I think also one problem for the USMCA, or especially for Mexico in terms of its industrialization process, was that almost at the same time the United States was starting that or this very strong commercial relationship with China. And although we were not like competing on the stage, but we were not like the main recipient of US investment during the past 30 years. And we'll review some data about this, although the data implies that Mexico has benefited a lot from the investment of US organizations. It hasn't been as much as we could expect, especially because of the geographic location.
Of course. Of course. Well, good. Well, let's see. We'd love to learn more about the insights that you've collected here for us today.
Thank you. So during along the presentation, and again, thank you, ISM Carolinas and Virginia for this opportunity. And we'll review these main topics along the presentation. And we'll start with the benefits and risks of for North America supply chains when nearshoring in Mexico. All right. And well, one effect of the trade war between the United States and China, as well as the disruption of supply chains experienced during the COVID-19 pandemic, has been the relocation of supply chains, either by onshoring to the US or nearshoring to other nations with favorable policies. And the nearshoring phenomena has raised great expectations on both sides of the border, and investors, the media, political actors have expressed broad interest in the relocation of supply chains in Mexico. However, the development of this phenomenon requires an in-depth analysis of the risk and benefits that it might entail. Since 1994, following the signing of the then NAFTA, the North America Free Trade Agreement, then in 2018, beginning of 2019, was renamed to USMCA, Mexico became a natural recipient of US investments. However, this trade association has been insufficient or not fully used by both Mexico and the United States for the consolidation of both economies. During the presentation of the different topics, I refer to the benefits and risk of relocating supply chains in Mexico according to these 5 paths. Cultural considerations that we briefly mentioned at the beginning. Also the total cost of ownership, although there are some implicit benefits because of the geographical location of Mexico. There are some risks because the way in which the industry in Mexico is set up, and that might imply an increase to the total cost of ownership. Also, in terms of logistics and transportation, of course, we are reducing distances, but we'll realize that sometimes the speed of transportation is not as fast as we might expect. And also, we need to check that the infrastructure in Mexico at the moment is in not very good shape. So it doesn't allow the shipments to be as fast as we could imagine, just because of the neighborhood of both countries. Also, in terms of economic conditions, we'll have a very brief review of the Mexican economy and to see how the ease of business represents some benefits, but at the same time, it entails some risks because of the way in which the system is set up in Mexico. Also, the time that it takes for different organizations to settle down in Mexico, to get access to different services. And also we'll review some of the main federal and local incentives. There are some good federal incentives. We'll check about the IMEX program. That is a program that was promoted initially to create jobs and also to be a duty-free for all the imports getting into Mexico in order to be like assembled or converted into another product and then being exported. And also we'll check about the political landscape, although Mexico has been, at least since 2001, a democracy. We'll see how some of the institutions have been eroded in the past 6 years. There's at the moment a big discussion about a reform to the judiciary in Mexico that might imply many risks for investors, and that may be some of the red flags that will be listening in the following years, at least in the following year previous to the review of the USMCA. As mentioned at the beginning, Mexico shares a border with the United States with more than 2,000 miles. Mexico is the 3rd largest country in Latin America. But with this strategic location with respect to the United States, both countries, I need to reiterate, haven't consolidated the necessary infrastructure to maximize the benefits of their proximity and translate this into cost and time reductions for the delivery of goods. It's important to keep in mind that despite having, and let me point here, 20 ports of entry along the border, almost two-thirds of the goods that are exported from Mexico to the United States cross through just three ports, and is Tijuana, Laredo, and Ciudad Juárez. Although the Mexican government and the US government have had this information since the ease of, of the free trade agreement, they haven't worked on diversifying the different ports of entry or the different ports for the merchandises to leave Mexico, because also Mexico has 17 ports and also 12 airports with the capacity to be customs at the same time. But
And
is
I
the
think that's a
same.
partly, I think, Rodrigo, that's in part, it's not just a part of Mexico or the United States. I think it seems to be more of an infrastructure challenge for both countries.
Yes, indeed, you're right, Dupre. And there have been some congresses in the United States, like looking to create like a share fund between not just the US and Mexico, but also Canada, because I think apart from our presentation, but there's also a data that I was reading from the New York Times last week about the exports from Canada to the United States, and it's the same story. Almost 60% cross through this area of the Great Lakes, and the rest of the border is like useless, let's say, in terms of international commerce with the United States.
Good points. Thank you.
Also, regarding the population, and this is one of the advantages that Mexico offers for nearshoring, is that Mexico has a demographic bonus and guarantees labor force supply due to the economic growth of both nations, as well as the resulting investments of the nearshoring effect. And also,
It
we are.
seems like an opposite from the United States, where our older generation is larger than the younger generation.
Yes, and the pyramid, as we can observe in the census, is inverted at the moment or in the process of getting inverted. And still Mexico has, let's say, 30 years or at least 40 years to provide a labor supply without having those problems, and especially before the upper part of the pyramid starts representing a harder, I don't want to mean like a burden, but in terms of the pension system. Also, in terms of the active population in Mexico, almost half or 50% of the population is actively, economically active in Mexico. So the different organizations that are aiming to settle down or to look in Mexico for opportunities for nearshoring, they will have access to labor force. Another point, and has been a good advantage of the free trade agreement, is that since 30 years ago, Mexico has achieved progress in educational terminal efficiency, because we have passed, before the free trade agreement, we just had like 15% of the population, and sorry, when I say we, is because I'm Mexican. We had just like from 15 to 17% of the population with a BA degree. At the moment, in 2024, 44 is still the same amount, 17%. But the main problem in Mexico before the free trade agreement is that in 1994, from this 17%, almost 80% had a BA in social sciences, and just 19 or less than that in engineering. In these past 30 years, it has changed, and now just 44% of the population with holding a BA degree has a BA in social sciences, 22% with a degree in engineering, and the rest in health sciences. So Mexico has improved, but still there's a lot to do in terms of dedicating more to math and sciences in Mexico, because also that's one of the main things that procurement professionals or many organizations look when when we want to start partnering with our suppliers in order to innovate or to have our own design departments in those countries where we have our manufacturing plants.
It's good. Yes. Now let's get to the good stuff. This is
Yeah,
great.
and about the Mexican economy, we can see according to the World Bank, Mexico is situated as the 14th largest economy. However, we need to realize that in 2010, Mexico was allocated as the 10th largest economy in the world. So we need to question how Mexico moved from the 10th place to the 14th place in the last 14 years. So this is one of the main problems that I want to emphasize, that Mexico hasn't taken advantage of its proximity to the United States.
Well,
Also,
how do you think, but I guess the question then becomes, how do you, I mean, there has been some growth, but do you think some of this has actually been tied to the other countries here, growing at a faster pace or having more foreign investment in their countries than Mexico? I don't know. I mean, maybe there are other factors, I guess, tied to not just Mexico itself.
yes, I think that Mexico relied so much in the industrial policies that they started in 1994, and mainly also in 2000 with the first transition to democracy, that they started a program, but more converting the industrial or the manufacturing sector in Mexico into an assembling manufacturing sector.
Mhm.
So Mexico hasn't been able to develop a strong political public policy in order to promote the creation of
Mhm.
suppliers or developing new suppliers in Mexico. And we have relied a lot into imports in order to process materials.
Got it. Yeah. Could be more business focused, I guess, then.
Yes, has been more into the assembling side rather than the innovation.
Interesting.
Also, we can analyze how the Mexican economy has behaved in the past 20, well, here is the 22 years according to the World Bank. And on average, the economic growth for Mexico has been 2%. We can observe so many downfalls, especially from with the international financial crisis or international crisis like 2001 to 2003, the financial crisis in 2008, and -6 decrease in the economic growth in Mexico, and not to mention the almost -9% during the pandemic. And has been a rebound in the past 2 years, but still the economic output of Mexico hasn't reached the levels previous to the pandemic. And it's also something that is like a good sign about the Mexican economy that, okay, we are, as we'll review in uh, ahead in the presentation, we have free trade agreements with many, at least with 50 nations, but we are impacted negatively always that there's a problem in those areas of the world. Mexico doesn't have like the resiliency still to emerge from these situations. And we are impacted as we can see with during the pandemic. Also, a highly positive aspect of the Mexican economy has been its openness to international trade, and we'll review later in the presentations some variables within the Mexican system that reduce the potential of these free trade agreements, such as tariff overregulation, lack of infrastructure, insecurity, and unsupportive policies for business. And one of the main effects of this lack of infrastructure, of the lack of investment in infrastructure, has been experienced in the past few years, and especially last February and March. There were major delays in cross-border cargo flow due to a glitch in Mexican customs, affecting the government agency ability to send import and export declarations electronically. And that created like lines of over 20 or almost 20 miles in the different cross borders of Laredo, Juarez, and Tijuana. And of course, that impacts the idea of organizations thinking about nearshoring in Mexico. I think the government needs to work so hard in order to bring the infrastructure to life and to be aligned with the needs of these organizations. It's not just about the idea that, okay, we are close. Yes, we are close, but you don't have the infrastructure. Your highways are not in good shape, hasn't been maintained, and also has been a problem of Mexico because of in the last few years, the government opted to delay the maintenance and to start creating social programs. They aim at combating poverty, but they are not doing so because they are just transferring cash to families or to different individuals without bringing them out of poverty. This figure makes very clear that the Mexican economy is oriented towards trade, both in imports and exports with the United States. We can see how in 1994, 69 of our imports in Mexico came from the United States. Actually, that number was reduced to 41%, but in terms of exports is almost the same amount. Over 80% of the Mexican exports, its destiny is the United States. One thing that will be creating or to become like a soundbite in the following months around the discussion of the USMCA is the participation of China in the Mexican market. As you can see, in previous to 1994, even China didn't appear as in terms of imports into Mexico, but nowadays almost 20% of imports in Mexico come from China, and it's something that has been pointed by many politicians, not just in the US, but also Canada, complaining that China is circumventing US tariffs by shipping more goods to Mexico. And of course, that's going to be like a race flag from here until the review of the USMCA. These are some of the main challenges of the Mexican economy, poverty levels, and from the procurement standpoint, the poverty levels are a risk because despite we are nearshoring in Mexico, we are sending our manufacturing plants to Mexico, we don't have the opportunity because of the poverty levels there to expand our markets in that country. That sometimes that's also an strategy of nearshoring or an aim of nearshoring. It's not just the expansion of the market, but also innovation, as mentioned before, in terms
Hmm.
of the structure of the labor force. Also, in terms of the fiscal debt, the Mexican government has persisted. Even this week, the budget for 2025 was published by the Mexican government, and it implies a large fiscal deficit, which means that many of the infrastructure projects that are needed in the country to attract foreign investment are going to be delayed. The Mexican government has mentioned that they are planning on public-private partnerships, but we need to be aware and uh, be conscious that these public partnerships take some time to, to be allocated, and especially in terms of new projects. Maybe there can be some partnerships in terms of maintenance, but at the same time, it will imply that the cost of transporting merchandises in Mexico is going to increase to some extent. Another point is about energy policies. The Mexican state passed energy reform in which the Mexican government is the only entity allowed to produce energy. And also the Mexican government reversed 3 years ago a reform to an energy reform that started allowing private investors to produce energy in Mexico. So now we are back into a system in which the government has the monopoly over energy, in Mexico. And also Mexico has reiterated its interest on maintaining investment in fossil fuels during the past 5 years, and they haven't finished with that oil refinery in the southeast of Mexico. They invested a large amount of money on an oil refinery, even when all the signs in the world go towards cleaner
Hmm.
energies. As you all know, the topic of insecurity and the ease for doing business in Mexico are some of the main challenges that will impact the idea for many organizations to nearshore in Mexico. As part of the USMCA, as part of the international trade context, something that has been very insightful when looking at the statistics about international trade is how not just the emergence of China as a rival of the United States, but also how the United States has relied for many, many years on imports in order to continue for its economy to move forward. We can check that in, oh, sorry. We can check here how the US has maintained a marked trade deficit since 1999. In nominal terms, the negative gap has increased, and 38% of this deficit, the 2018 to the 3,970, is due to the deficit with China. And that's why is like China, like the main, let's call it like a sparring for US politicians when talking about tariffs, but also almost 15% of that deficit corresponds to the trade balance with Mexico. So that's why Mexico is like the second best sparring in terms of pointing out outside for the enemy in terms of commercial trade and also commercial barriers. So we'll be listening in the following months about how Mexico need to do certain things in order to comply with the United States. Otherwise, the United States will start raising tariffs to Mexican products. And it happened in 2019. We need to remember with the first migration crisis during the almost at the end of the first administration and the beginning of the leftist government in Mexico that immediately they say, if the migration persists at this volume, we'll need to raise the tariffs to Mexican products. The Mexican government reacted immediately and started deploying the army or police officers along the border in the south border with Central American countries, and also arresting or deporting migrants to their countries of origin.
Well, now that I guess Rodrigo, now that we're because since now that we're in the current state of the USMCA, maybe we could just maybe focus on now of where we are recently now because it's been the pandemic and the USMCA has really tried to shape a lot of aspects of the relationship, and with the coming administration, there's going to uh, it has a lot of chance to change, and then it also has a chance for, I guess, Mexico, or it may force Mexico to look to diversify its international partners.
Yes, and I think that it's going to be a very good call for Mexico, not just to, as you mentioned, to diversify its partners, but also for Mexico to start modifying its industrial policy and to bring or to create suppliers within Mexico, and not just to be importing stuff from other countries, assembling certain products, and from then exporting to the US or into other countries. I think that Mexico has the need to start uh, changing towards a more business mindset and creating and developing products within our borders. Otherwise, Mexico will be like this time to be like an assembly manufacturing place. And I think it's no longer the idea even for the United States. The US needs a partner that can support supply chains from their inception.
Mhm.
Just we don't need as US organizations just like the last mile in Mexico. We need
Mhm.
the entire process to start in Mexico and to finish in Mexico. And I think that part of the USMC review will be hardly dedicated or concentrated into the content or the percentage of the products that need to have national content. Oh, sorry, it's my phone with the
So I guess now that we're Rodrigo, now that we're looking at no, I guess uh, just wanted to make sure we had a chance for our attendees to ask some questions as well. Where do you see now that we're seeing some changes, like you said, within the Mexican government on who gets to choose the judges in the judiciary system, plus the changes in the energy system that would that might limit any industry, the alternative energy industry of solar or wind to develop in Mexico. Yeah, those are two big industries. Plus, we still have the maquiladora opportunities for US companies to do some of their manufacturing and take advantage of the labor costs. Um, is the US, is the Mexican government, from your perspective, really ready to be as pro-business as they need to be with the changes that are coming?
To be very honest and straightforward, I don't think that the Mexican government is as pro-business. I think that the new president who took power last October 1st, she has a different mindset, although despite she comes from a leftist party, but they still want to maintain some of the public policies oriented into social programs and
Hmm.
not to increasing or to create employment in Mexico, which is, I think, like to me, like the scariest part of the story, because we cannot, or the Mexican government has not enough funds to sustain those programs. The fiscal
Hmm.
deficit is increasing year by year, and maybe the past 6 years or the following 2 years is still like bearable, but at some point the bomb will explode and
Hmm.
we'll realize that we didn't work as a country, and I mean public and private sector, toward towards an industrial policy about like creating or supporting supply chains from their inception and also being competitive. I
Hmm.
think what happened to many organizations, US organizations when moving to China was learned from the Chinese government and also Chinese investors immediately. They knew that their value, it was not just like the cheap labor. It was also to start developing or being an integral part of the supply chain. And
Hmm.
it's something that Mexico needs to work very hard. I think that the new Secretary of Economy in Mexico is working hard in order to take a political advantage of the renegotiation of the USMCA, but they'll need to show that the country is ready to change in terms of being a more pro-business state rather than a political or
Hmm.
diplomatic agenda on.
So I guess some of the takeaways, Rodrigo, if I hear you correctly, are the talent that's there in Mexico now is there's a lot more talent that's in the engineering and technology skill in the technology area. So the labor force at that level, outside of the government, really is ready for business. And some of these companies are benef many companies are benefiting from that talent, which so in the education area, technology and mathematics and engineering skills are being taught, and it's generating a lot of good labor. However, on when it comes to the when it comes to energy, there is some investment, but it could be better if we had more alternative energy sources to help new companies set up operations. But at the same time, the government still could be better at making it a pro business or making it easier to do business and expand businesses for multinational companies in Mexico.
Yes, for sure. Mexico needs to start, and I mean, deregulating the production of energy. I think the idea of the government being the only entity in charge of producing energy is not just obsolete, is from the 70s or from the 1960s, that idea. And even in from 2010 to 2019, is an Spanish company, Iberdrola, invested in Mexico, and their their 13 energy plants were expropriated by the Mexican government. Although they reached an agreement about the cost of the price for the Mexican government to pay for those plants, but that created also a problem in terms of attracting foreign direct investment into Mexico, because you cannot be sending some signals to the world, but acting in a different way.
Well, I guess another thing that I feel like I heard from you also is there's still untapped potential for non-Mexican government and commercial companies to actually do business, and especially in those port areas, Manzanillo or in the Tijuana area or near El Paso and Ciudad Juarez and and then even on the Yucatan area as well, where we've got ocean ports. So it sounds like in those areas, at least within the commercial sector, they are more ready for business than perhaps other areas. So it sounds like that could be a good focus area, but it's probably it's been a focus area for China, like you said, and non-US countries to do business there.
Yes, and I think that many investors, or especially if we are talking about the Chinese firms looking for opportunities in Mexico, they are eager to participate, to bring their merchandises or even their capital, because they know that they need to diversify. But also the Mexican government at the same time, they need to diversify. And as you mentioned, being pro-business, you need to be like open for others to also benefit. It's not just about like the government or political gains. It means like bringing benefits for the population,
Hmm.
but by the creation of employment or increasing the quality of life in many areas of the country.
Hmm. Well, then it sounds like, honestly, from a nearshoring perspective, um, with it's just something that we in the supply management community still need to be aware of, that even if if those tariffs really do come into effect next year or starting next year, we may end up losing on some of the purchasing power we had before, and other company, and so we really do need to look at better, maybe smarter ways of doing sourcing with Mexico. At the same
Yes,
time, if we were, because nearshoring does sound good in some ways, but we still need to stay up to date and review the changes going on in Mexico to make the right decisions.
yes, because mainly like the from the procurement perspective, my opinion is that we need to start partnering with local suppliers in Mexico and helping, I mean, helping by for them to work very hard, but also for US organized companies to work shoulder by shoulder with them in order that these new suppliers become reliable for the 21st century supply chains that we need.
Well, um, Rodrigo, this has been yeah, I guess we're definitely going to need to take a to watch very closely between now and definitely part of next year, the last year where we'll have to then where the Mexican government and U.S. government are going to have to then kind of evaluate the how effective and how successful the USMCA has been for our country, for the two countries.
Yes, and I want to remark that, okay, Mexico's comparative and competitive advantage make it the country as an alternative for nearshoring. However, needs to be accompanied by sound economic and industrial policies by both US and Mexico. Also, Mexico is offering like a more favorable political landscape. However, the spend and risk analysis needs to consider all these macroeconomic variables and socioeconomic conditions for the organizations to be very clear what they are going to challenge once they land in Mexico.
Agreed. Well, why don't this has been very insightful. Thank you for so many different in Mexico internal perspectives here. I do want to make sure we have some time for questions. I know we still have several folks here.
Yeah, that would be
Please feel
great.
free to submit your questions, or feel free, you can go off mute as well as we um, want to make time for you as well. Rodrigo, for me personally, I had one question is, a lot of this information is great here. Would you be willing to then share some of your slides with us at the close?
Absolutely, Dupre. Yes, and
Great. That'd be great. Now, and also, how would we, are there some resources perhaps here within the US where we could perhaps get more of that information, more detailed information and follow it? Are there some resources that you would recommend that we follow between now, over over the this next year or so? What would you recommend?
well, also I recommend them like in so eager into data mining, and I'll usually review like the Bureau of Economic Analysis and that I'm like quoting here, but also to check about what are the political trends. We know that still the geopolitical tensions will be like a main variable in the following years. We know that the conflict between Russia and Ukraine still is one of the main topics for the United States. And I think that that makes Mexico like a real alternative for nearshoring. And I think that we need to check about the trends in terms of the policies that the Mexican government or what industries are moving into Mexico. We know that the aerospace, automotive, some uh, other like not manufacturing, but the last processes for many uh, pharmaceuticals is also like they have a main point in Mexico, but we need to check how they are reshaping themselves. If they are expanding in Mexico, they are just maintaining the levels of investment, or if they are looking for some other locations, either in Central America, because also Costa Rica has become like a main recipient for nearshoring for certain industries. But at the same time, countries like Brazil are started and Argentina are looking for a place in that list.
Very helpful. So would you say so in definitely so industries I'm hearing from you in healthcare is definitely an area where we need to watch. Sounds like in manufacturing we really do need to watch um, the different trends with U.S. Mexico and um, and then I guess really also in consumer goods and then the food sector, right?
Yeah, and especially as you mentioned, no, how the manufacturing is behaving, if it's increasing the activity in Mexico due to the demand from the US, or if it's stagnating at the
Hmm.
moment in Mexico. And I think that we need to keep an eye on those different indicators to know how it might evolve. And especially, I think something very useful is gonna be like to check on the how the Mexican government spends on infrastructure. I think that it will be like a main point for investors to know if
Hmm.
the government is looking for development or is just to maintaining the, let's say, the mal or the good
Hmm.
administration things.
Well, very good. Well, Rodrigo, on behalf of ISMC Carolinas, Virginia, thank you so much for this. Adish, well, let's see. Well, real quick, I believe that what we can do, Adesh, is we can connect you to Rodrigo here after after the webinar. I know we're reaching the end here, but thank you very much for your question, and we'll make sure to answer it. But on behalf of ISM Carolinas, Virginia, Rodrigo, it's been a pleasure having you here today. And for those who would like to get your continuing education hours, please contact us at ISM-CV and we'll be more than happy to help you. But again, Rodrigo, thank you very much. And thanks to
Thank you.
everyone for your time today.
Thank you.